Jay Dyer's followers are sometimes criticized of worshiping Jay Dyer like a god. Yet at the same time, many of his critics consider him a fraud. If you go online, you will find many posts from people that go a little something like this. I was interested in Eastern Orthodoxy, and so I went online and I found an apologist named Jay Dyer. And it is because of Jay Dyer's content and his Discord server and his presence online, including his website, that I converted to the Eastern Orthodox faith and joined one of the Eastern Orthodox churches. Jay Dyer has played a prominent role in the conversion of many people in the West to the Eastern Orthodox faith and in their joining of an Eastern Orthodox church. Yet at the same time, his Discord and some of his followers have been accused of running cult tactics, including cyberstalking, blackmail, and even doxing. Yet despite all of this, Jay Dyer's follower counts online are likely to be the highest follower counts for any English-speaking online Eastern Orthodox apologist. And so today, I will be your host in diving into the complete story of Jay Dyer, a very polarizing figure. And like any online intellectual, it all starts with his college degree now, doesn't it? And Jay Dyer got his college degree in philosophy. And after he finished his bachelor's, he went on to graduate school to study literary theory, espionage, and more philosophy, and the interplay between these things. Jay Dyer claims that his work covers psychological warfare as well as film, and his work began online with his content and with his website, Jay's Analysis. And when I checked when Jay's Analysis domain was created, it showed me online that jaysanalysis.com was created on February 23rd, 2011. And on the site's description is the following: that Jay Dyer's website, Jay's Analysis, is there to investigate the deeper themes and messages found in our globalist pseudo-culture. And his website focuses on philosophy and metaphysics, which is a branch of philosophy, and secret societies, and Hollywood, psychological warfare, and comparative religion. And Jay Dyer self-describes his website as being one of the premier film and philosophy sites on the net. And the earliest YouTube video I could find of Jay Dyer on his channel was from 2009, so he's been around on the internet for quite a while. And his audience is composed primarily of young men who are either converts to Eastern Orthodoxy or who are aspiring to be converts to Eastern Orthodoxy. There are some cradle Orthodox in there as well as non-Orthodox, but that seems to be the primary demographic for Jay Dyer's content. And Jay Dyer is a regular host on the InfoWars show with its host, who I will not name in this video. And Jay Dyer also used to co-host this other TV show called Hollywood Decoded, and it aired on Gaia TV, which I found online, with his co-host, Jay Wiedner. And so let's get into his spiritual journey. Jay Dyer started off as a Protestant. He was a former Protestant. And what happened through time is Jay Dyer ultimately became disillusioned with Protestantism. And in his disillusionment with Protestantism, Jay Dyer converted to the Roman Catholic Church. And he even had contentions with the Roman Catholic Church as well. And he became a Sedevacantist, which is someone who believes that the papacy of the Catholic Church is vacant and that the seat of the Pope is really only held by an impostor. And the timing of his conversion from Protestantism to Roman Catholicism remains unclear. But he also eventually converted to Eastern Orthodoxy somewhere around the mid-2010s. It's unclear exactly when. And Jay Dyer converted to Eastern Orthodoxy prior to conversion to Eastern Orthodoxy becoming a trend. There is a 2023 survey that shows that almost half of Orthodox converts surveyed came since the pandemic began. So there has been an explosion of Eastern Orthodox converts in some areas in America and in the West. But Jay Dyer has been making content for Eastern Orthodoxy well before this explosion. And in this 2023 survey, it was shown that 78% of the male converts who converted to Eastern Orthodoxy are under the age of 40. And that is a trend that is also reflected in Jay Dyer's demographics. And if we observe his theology, Jay Dyer's theological framework can be described as neo-patristics mixed with presuppositional apologetics from 20th century Reformed theology. It's a mouthful. Neo-patristics is a branch of philosophy that exists within the context of Eastern Orthodoxy, kind of spearheaded by the likes of people like Gregory Palamas, who then had his works advanced by other more contemporary scholars from the past few centuries. And in terms of the Reformed theology, that's typically referring to Jay Dyer's usage of the Transcendental Argument. That was something that was really spearheaded by the Reformed Calvinist Van Til. And we'll be getting into that later in this video. Jay Dyer is staunchly opposed to ecumenism. Ecumenism is the desire to reunite with other churches and to see past the differences within Christian denominations and to try to aim for unity and getting along. Jay Dyer's content and his personality is staunchly opposed to any ecumenism. There's this idea that is spoken about sometimes on the internet of apostolic Christianity, which posits that the three apostolic churches of Christ include the Eastern Orthodox Church, the Oriental Orthodox Church, and the Roman Catholic Church. And some people think that these three churches hold a prominence in Christianity, and that all of them have some validity to them. This is something that Jay Dyer is staunchly opposed to, as well as his opposition to all of the Protestant denominations as well. And when Jay Dyer has someone who kind of inquires to him about joining Eastern Orthodoxy, he tends to refer them to the Russian Orthodox Church of America, allegedly, ROCOR it's called. And he published a book called Essays on Theology and Philosophy. And this book was really a collection of many of the articles that he had on his website, Jay's Analysis. And allegedly someone put it all together and it was published, and Jay Dyer sells it as a book. Now, to go back to the Transcendental Argument for the existence of God, this is Jay Dyer's bread and butter. This is the primary argument that he uses in his apologetics. And the core claim of Jay's Transcendental Argument is that logic is absolute, and it presupposes God for logic to even work. And it's not just logic. What Jay Dyer is saying is that for logic to even exist, there needs to be a God. Logic presupposes God, but he will also say that this is true of other transcendentals, such as the self, such as space-time, etc. And the main structure of this argument goes something like this. Premise 1. X is the necessary precondition for Y. Premise 2. Y exists. Conclusion. X exists. And so, if applied to Jay Dyer's argument, it would go something like, logic exists. God is the necessary precondition for logic. Therefore, God exists. But Jay Dyer's formulation of the transcendental argument for the existence of God, according to Jay Dyer, specifically proves only the Eastern Orthodox God and conception of God and all of the theology that comes with it. He would not claim that the transcendental argument for the existence of God is something that a Protestant can use properly, because a Protestant doesn't have all of the theology that comes with Eastern Orthodoxy. And when talking about the transcendental argument, Jay Dyer will often talk about the concepts such as the one and the many by Plato, and he will contrast the superiority of the transcendental argument to Plato's conception of forms and of the quote-unquote supernatural. And he will posit Christianity, specifically Eastern Orthodox Christianity, as superior, and he will use tag to do so. And he often also argues using tag in the context of absolute divine simplicity, which is a Catholic doctrine about the nature of God and the Godhead. And so Jay Dyer is an eclectic kind of guy. He's not only into theology and philosophy, because he has a book series called Esoteric Hollywood, which Jay Dyer claims that the book covers deep, dark, mysterious undertones in Tinseltown's biggest films. And Jay Dyer's method in Esoteric Hollywood is to use philosophy and comparative religion and symbolism and geopolitics in order to triangulate and decode secrets that he claims exists in many of the Hollywood films. And he thinks that modern filmmakers are the heirs of magicians of ancient mystery schools, and that there is an occult connection to calling Hollywood stars stars. This is something that is claimed on Goodreads in reference to his book, Esoteric Hollywood. Jay Dyer would argue that films function as an intelligence apparatus psyop, or a Luciferian ritual, and that the purpose of Hollywood films, at least in part, if not wholly, is to social engineer the masses and to hide hidden foundations of power and the revelation of the method of those who hold said power. Jay Dyer self-describes his efforts with Esoteric Hollywood as being scholarly research, but a lot of the critics of Esoteric Hollywood would say otherwise. A lot of Jay Dyer's critics will say that Esoteric Hollywood has inevitable cherry picking of which movies to dissect to begin with, which they see as problematic. And they will accuse him of twisting evidence to prove his point in Esoteric Hollywood. They will say that wild speculation litters Esoteric Hollywood, and that the speculation masquerades as fact, and that there's a very loose definition of what has been proved, which goes to show that Esoteric Hollywood got a rather mixed reception, and there were a lot of critics criticizing Jay Dyer's alleged scholarly research, which is what in the description of Esoteric Hollywood is described as being scholarly research. Jay Dyer also had a show called Hollywood Decoded. And in this show, he analyzed major films. Some of these films include things like The Matrix, A Space Odyssey, Terminator, Eyes Wide Shut, Twin Peaks, Star Trek, Interstellar, and Inception. And very much like his book series, Esoteric Hollywood, Hollywood Decoded interprets these films through esoteric allegory, Jungian archetypes, Hermetic thought, Kabbalistic teachings, and Gnosticism. An example claim of this is that Star Trek served as slow disclosure of the secret space program, or what he would consider to be the secret space program. Jay Dyer is a regular host on InfoWars, where he covers geopolitical analysis steeped in conspiracy theory. And he makes claims such as the Fortune 100 and Fortune 500 are funding and fostering radical ideas such as cultural relativism, ethical relativism, epistemological relativism. And all of this, according to Jay Dyer, ultimately leads to nihilism. And he argues that the radical leftism and the radical directions of radical leftism aren't antithetical to capitalism, that these ideologies aren't necessarily anti-capitalistic, and that this is the biggest thing that conservatives have to learn about leftism. And it's the one big thing that he claims that conservatives don't understand about leftism. And there is a bit of a contention between Jay Dyer's image with his supporters and with his detractors, because he is often hailed by his supporters as being an elite debater with a command for rhetoric and wit. And he himself will talk about the importance of using rhetoric and wit in debate, in formal debate. Now, rhetoric is a word that often is traced back to the classical Greek era, and it is often contrasted with another concept known as dialectic. Dialectic is what is often employed in formal debate, where the purpose of dialectic is to have interlocutors debate one another in the pursuit of truth, and the interlocutors are trying to stomp out any fallacy and think about things extremely logically and rigidly to get to the bottom of the truth and to get to the bottom of things. Whereas rhetoric is a bit more employed for the purpose of persuasion. It's to persuade the masses. It's to persuade an audience. And many of the classical Greeks actually had a strong distaste for rhetoric. They thought it was beneath them. Us philosophers, we use logic and reason, and we don't stoop down to using the tactics of persuasion and emotional appeals and such things. Now, there is an exception, and that's Aristotle, because Aristotle wrote a great book on rhetoric. Technically, they were lecture notes, but we now know it today as a book, because Aristotle saw the utility and the importance of rhetoric in practical day-to-day life, such as in law or such as giving a eulogy. And Jay Dyer seems to agree with Aristotle on the importance of rhetoric, but where Jay Dyer might depart in some degree from Aristotle is Jay Dyer will claim that the usage of rhetoric is good even in a formal debate, which would have been known in the classical Greek era as dialectic. But he says that that's okay. And he emphasizes the importance of these things, even in formal discourse. But his style is often seen as a consequence, as being aggressive, as being assertive, as domineering, and put in place to demonstrate weakness in the opponent very quickly. And Jay Dyer, using these debate tactics, will host his open forum debate and Q&A chat, which he does frequently on a weekly basis, maybe several times a week, he will go on X, formerly known as Twitter, and YouTube, and he'll go live, and he'll have these open forum series where people can call in and debate him on things like Protestantism, on things like Islam, paganism, evangelicalism, etc. But what's interesting about Jay Dyer and his open Q&A series is he tends to avoid Oriental Orthodox. Now, if you're unaware, there is more than one church that claims orthodoxy. You may have heard of orthodoxy in reference to the Eastern Orthodox Church, but there is another communion of churches that are ancient, that I myself am a part of, that are known colloquially in America today and in the West today as the Eastern Orthodox churches and the Eastern Orthodox communion, the one Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. And Jay Dyer has had a history of avoiding debating with the Oriental Orthodox. There is, of course, the prominent Oriental Orthodox apologist known as Agin, who runs the YouTube channel Apostolic Orthodoxy. And Agin is very willing to debate with Jay Dyer. But Jay Dyer, for some reason, continues to hand wave the Oriental Orthodox. And he claims that they've been dealt with. But that's not the case. Agin from Apostolic Orthodoxy attempted to debate Jay Dyer by calling into one of these open forums and these open Q&As. And Jay Dyer refused to engage with him in any meaningful way. And Jay Dyer hung up on him very quickly in a way that was not justified. And so Jay Dyer is a man who has a couple enemies. He definitely has a couple critics. He did a talk with James White, who challenged Jay Dyer to defend the Council of Nicaea too. And James White's description of Jay Dyer's behavior is, quote, an amazing expulsion of infantile behavior. White claims that Dyer froze up when historical documents were discussed, and he calls him a fraud who does not know any of the history. And James White allegedly compares Jay Dyer's apologetics to Steve Christie apologetics, but louder. And James White is only one of the few debate interlocutors who have accused Jay of being overly aggressive, overly hostile, and in general unpleasant to debate with. And he is sometimes accused, Jay Dyer is sometimes accused of sophistry. Now, sophistry is also a concept that comes from the classical Greeks, and it's a concept that is contrasted to philosophy. Philosophy is the pursuit of truth, whereas sophistry is the lies and the deception of smooth talkers. And that's how they were referred to during the days of Plato and Aristotle, sophists. Jay Dyer is accused of being a sophist and using sophistry. He is accused of having cheap debate tactics. And this is something that Jay Dyer, he might not call them cheap debate tactics, but he clearly is somebody who is not afraid to use rhetoric and to use certain emotional appeals and persuasive appeals, even in a formal debate. Sometimes he is accused of being an outright liar by his critics, and he is accused of hypocrisy by his critics. And there is an extension to Jay Dyer, a strong critique of his primary argument, the Transcendental Argument for God, which we covered. And it is often accused of being a logical howler, which means it has maybe a correct result, but it uses incorrect logic. And it's sometimes also accused of falling into the informal fallacy of papito principii in Latin, which means begging the question. Begging the question would look something like this. Begging the question would be saying it's time to go to bed. And then when asked why, the answer might be because it's bedtime. Some of his critics accuse the Transcendental Argument of falling into this informal fallacy. And his critics will say about his usage of the Transcendental Argument that poking a hole in another worldview does not entail that your view is the only logically possible one. So there's a contradiction. There's a bit of a juxtaposition with Jay Dyer, where his supporters will see his debates as him employing rhetoric and wit and being very confident in his points. But his critics, both his debate interlocutors, as well as viewers of these debates, will sometimes accuse him of having infantile behavior in his debates. So there's a bit of a reception gap when it comes to Jay Dyer's persona online, where his supporters will love his style, but his critics will think that his style is horrible. And what's worse, the digital format, the online format, often incentivizes aggressive and theatrical performances because there is a strong incentive online to keep people engaged with your content as long as possible if you are a content creator. The algorithms reward you for keeping people around as long as possible. And unlike a real world scenario where someone might be locked in to a function in real life, for example, a priest who's giving a sermon kind of has a captive audience, especially if the sermon's in the middle of the liturgy, because people don't want to get up and leave because they want to finish the liturgy. And much in the same way, if there is a debate in person and it's in a stadium and you pay tickets to go and watch the debate, you have a lot of friction in leaving that debate. But online, it's very different, because online, if someone doesn't want to watch something, it's as simple as clicking away and going to watch something else. And there are plenty of other distractions online, from even on YouTube, for example, the suggested bar and different tabs you might have open, and even things distracting in real life. So people who make content online have to fight a ruthless battle for your attention. And in doing that, it creates these sort of aggressive and overly entertaining performances by some people who engage in debates. At the very least, the incentive for that behavior exists. And so there is that incentive for debaters to be as flamboyant and as entertaining as they could possibly be. But what's more, when you watch a debate online, you may not know the history of the individual, and even if you are very well familiar with this person's persona online, you don't know who this person is in real life. So this does create oftentimes what is known as the flattening effect on an individual's personality. And they might be seen as being addicted to outrage or something, but really they are sort of following their incentives much of the time. And so we get into the Orthobro phenomena, the rise of a movement. Because Jay Dyer is known as a controversial leader in this movement, known as the Orthobro movement. And he is known as a central figure and leader of the online Orthobros. And this Orthobro movement is sometimes criticized as being reactive orthodoxy. It is a reaction to a specific political landscape and cultural landscape. And orthodoxy is used by these Orthobros. The critics accuse these Orthobros of using orthodoxy as a way to kind of react to the issues that these converts or these aspirants might have been dealing with already in their day-to-day life that are specific to a place and a culture. And the Orthobro movement is known to actively catechize the next generation of North American converts. Now, to catechize in this context means to instruct someone in the principles of Christian religion. And in this case, we're talking specifically about Eastern Orthodoxy. And his influence, Jay Dyer's influence in the Orthobro movement, has been described as significant in many Orthodox circles. And the demographic of a typical Orthobro is somebody who is male, young, and wanting to convert to Orthodoxy, or has recently converted to Orthodoxy. And the Orthobros are sometimes criticized, or at least described as, integrating Orthodox theology with Christian nationalism and social conservatism and traditionalist politics. That's why some of the critics of the Orthobro movement refer to it as reactive orthodoxy. And the Orthobros and their movement are said to be drawn by the perceived sense of tradition and history in orthodoxy that they think is missing in the zeitgeist and culture and time and place in which they grew up in. This is often the case with millennials and Gen Z in this demographic. And now we get into the big 2023 controversy with Jay Dyer and one of his biggest critics, known as Noah Jefferson. And Noah Jefferson is someone who is, I wouldn't say prominent, but is well invested in Orthodox theology. And he accuses this Orthobro movement that I just described as being a church within the church. He sees it as a bubble within the bigger bubble that is Eastern Orthodoxy. But he accuses Jay Dyer, this Noah Jefferson critic, accuses Jay Dyer and his Orthobros as operating as a parasite upon the church. Because what he says he does is, while Jay Dyer and the Orthobros are criticized to reject the Eastern Orthodox's teaching authority, they will cleave to the hierarchical structure of the Eastern Orthodox Church for sacraments and for canonical legitimacy, while rejecting the church's teaching authority over them. Noah Jefferson also accuses Jay Dyer's discord as being a vast forum for catechesis, but that this catechism, this teaching of Eastern Orthodoxy that is spearheaded and led by Jay Dyer online and in Discord, as being outside of the traditional oversight of the Eastern Orthodox Church and its bishops and its priests. And I personally tried to find this server and I couldn't. I tried to look for a link to it. I tried to find out how to get into it. I couldn't get into it. So I'm not sure if it's still up but hidden, or if his Discord server has been taken down altogether. And Noah goes on with more extreme accusations, accusing Jay Dyer's Discord as using cult tactics, shunning, cyberstalking, cyberbullying, doxing, and blackmail. And he described this movement within Jay Dyer's Discord and the Orthobro movement as a whole as operating like a mafia that uses fear to keep anyone in line who happens to make a name for himself in online Orthodox apologetics. And this Noah Jefferson critic has accused Jay Dyer and his moderators of banning any dissenting individuals, anyone who might not agree with what Jay Dyer believes or what the Orthobros believe. He says they just immediately get banned. And while I don't know whether that's true or not, because I don't have access to this Discord server, I do empathize that this is often the case with the debates that Jay Dyer will have in his open Q&A. He will, for example, I mentioned Agan from Apostolic Orthodoxy. Agan called in and tried to have a debate with Jay Dyer, and Jay Dyer refused to entertain Agan from Apostolic Orthodoxy, who is a prominent online apologist for the Oriental Orthodox. And many times Jay Dyer will often say, I'm not having this conversation, and he'll hang up. Now, there's an argument to be made that Jay Dyer doesn't engage in these conversations because he thinks that his interlocutor is not engaging with him in good faith. But there is also an argument to be made that Jay Dyer shuts down people because he may not be comfortable engaging with that individual's premises or ideas. There's an argument to be made both ways. And Noah Jefferson, he accuses the Orthobros of intimidating other Orthodox communities online and shunning anyone who disagrees with them. Remember, I said earlier that Jay Dyer is rather anti-ecumenical. He's rather polemical. And what that means is that he is very much of the mind that he is right in his theology and every other Christian denomination is wrong, and that there can be no communion between him as an Eastern Orthodox and any of the other Orthodox churches. There could be no, more specifically, there cannot be communion, he thinks, between the Eastern Orthodox Church and any of the other churches. And he sees the Eastern Orthodox Church as the only one holy Catholic and apostolic church. And Noah Jefferson then goes on to accuse the Orthobros and Jay Dyer of reducing theology to pietism and polemics. Pietism is its holiness, or the pursuit of religiosity, while polemics is the communication of theology in a way that is very much communicating that my theology is correct and dissenting theological ideas are incorrect. That's what polemics means. And one of the biggest critiques that Noah Jefferson had of Jay Dyer and the Orthobro movement is that this movement defines itself through the opposition of the other. So it defines themselves by what they're not, is what this massive critic of Jay Dyer, Noah Jefferson, says. He says that these Orthobros will say that we're not Catholic, we're not Protestants, we're not atheists, we're not like them, we're not like them. So Noah accuses Jay Dyer and the Orthobros of basing their identity not around what they're about, but around what it is that they're not about, that they're defined by who they're not by who they are, Noah Jefferson will state. And he finishes off, Noah Jefferson, by saying that he's not going to engage with the Orthobros movement's influencers anymore, because for him, it's not an academic disagreement. But for him, what he's trying to do, he says, is that he's trying to expose and be free of this abusive cult of the Orthobros. Now, some people come in, some of Jay's supporters come in, and they try to support Jay Dyer, and they try to defend Jay Dyer. And they will make claims such as his internet persona doesn't reflect his true self, that he's really a nice guy behind the scenes. Some of his supporters will say things like, he is, and I quote, extremely charitable, kind, and selfless in person. Some will emphasize that he is not a clergyman and he doesn't offer spiritual advice and he doesn't pretend to be a clergyman, and that he knows a circle of competence and he doesn't step outside of a circle of competence, and that he doesn't try to be a priest or a clergyman. Another one of his supporters says that he consistently directs people to priests and clergymen for guidance. And so Jay Dyer is the reason, according to many online, why they converted to Eastern Orthodoxy. And his primary demographic is young, dismantled male converts and young, predominantly male converts. His critics sometimes accuse his followers of being drawn to what they might call a smug superiority. And that his appeal is not only about Orthodox theology, but what makes Jay Dyer so appealing, according to some of his critics, is his integration of theology with Christian nationalism and socially conservative politics. And so Jay Dyer is an extremely polarizing figure. Some accuse his followers of worshiping him like a god, while others, when they talk about him online and they will make threads about him, will categorize him as being physically painful and cringe-inducing to watch. And so there's this contrast when it comes to a figure like Jay Dyer, where they see Jay Dyer, his critics will see Jay Dyer as an absolute buffoon, as an idiot, and as a fraud, while the people who revere him see him truly as a true scholar and as one of the best, if not the absolute best, Eastern Orthodox apologists on the internet. Sometimes his critics will accuse him of projecting an intellectual pride and supremacy under the guise of defending his Eastern Orthodox faith. And one of his critics online says that he makes his religion appear Pharisaic. Now, what does that mean? What is Pharisaic? He's talking about the Pharisees. The Pharisees were a group of people in the Bible who were often spoken about during the life of Jesus and the Gospels. And when his critic calls him Pharisaic, he's saying that Jay Dyer's character is characteristic of the Pharisees in the Bible. And the character of the Pharisees was very legalistic. They were very much about the law. They were very much about showing themselves to be a sort of authority and being too preoccupied with their image and authority and control. And one of his critics online accuses him of having this sort of personality. And some of his critics will also say that his arrogance and his smugness affects potential converts, because some converts might see how smug he is and perceive him to be arrogant, and then decide that they don't want to convert to Eastern Orthodoxy. And others yet still label him as being a cult leader and managing a cult that is masquerading as a Christian church. And back to Noah Jefferson accuses him of representing a cognitive dissonance facing Orthodoxy today, where he will say that the rigorist and neo-traditionalist faction that Jay Dyer is a part of is something that is effectively holding a monopoly over online Eastern Orthodoxy. And Jay Dyer represents something that is bigger than himself. Jay Dyer represents a broader overall trend, a broader societal implication, which is that of traditional religious authority, that of the traditional church, that includes priests and deacons and bishops, in contrast to charismatic online figures. And he is kind of a demonstration, a manifestation of the tension between these two things, where an individual, through their charisma and through their bravado, might garner themselves a following online around religious topics. But that charismatic individual may not be traditionally part of the clergy, or might not traditionally be considered a religious authority. And Noah Jefferson accuses him of taking that clerical authority away from the priests and from the bishops in the Eastern Orthodox Church. And he's accused of being someone who operates his apologetics and his online theology as being outside any official Eastern Orthodox synod. And this is something that is likely to continue to occur as the internet allows discussion around religion to be continuously decentralized, it does create this tension between the central traditional authorities of the Eastern Orthodox Church, or even the Roman Catholic Church, or the Oriental Orthodox Church, and people who can just turn on a camera and reach many people online through their ideas about theology without any official authority as a clergy member, a priest, a bishop, a deacon, etc. And so the contradiction with Jay Dyer persists, where he is simultaneously an academic who embraces conspiracy theories. Some might consider even wild conspiracy theories. He is sometimes considered to be a theologian, but at the same time, an individual who displays infantile behavior. He is considered sometimes to be a spiritual guide, but at the same time, his methods are labeled to be those of cult tactics. And he mixes what might be seen as intellectual depth with these controversial polemics. Now, remember, polemics is a very defensive or I'm right, you're wrong sort of attitude about theology. And he has a significant influence over an ever-growing online community because, luckily for Jay Dyer, orthodoxy has been quite trendy really ever since the post-pandemic era that we entered. And that's working in his favor. And this trend is likely to grow in recent years online. And so he really does serve as a case study in the online influence dynamics and the way that influence works now with the spreading and the prominence of social networks on the internet and the subsequent ever increasing time spent on these networks. And it shows the power for religious conversion in a digital age where many people can be drawn and influenced to convert to a specific denomination within Christianity or a religion even as a consequence of the internet. And it shows the power. Jay Dyer shows the power of individual voices, ragtag voices in the digital sphere. There are many besides him. I myself, well, I'm a deacon, but I can just turn on a camera, and I have turned on a camera, and I make content online about theology. And so this phenomena of this dissemination of information that is now possible through digital mediums and the internet is simultaneously capable of profound illumination, of bringing a lot of seekers to the truth, but also it can create intense contention and intense confusion. There we go. There's my water cap. 1 second. Okay. So what's the future? The future seems to be that online communities will continue to evolve and they will continue to hold influence and be influential over people and their ideas and what they believe to be true. And the future will continue to present this tension between traditional institutions and the online charismatic leaders and speakers on the internet. And figures like Jay Dyer, others come to mind, Sam Shamoun, Bless God Studios, Voice of Reason, etc., are likely to persist in shaping religious and cultural identity in the West, and even outside of the West. And so the story about Jay Dyer really does serve as a reminder of the power of the digital sphere And it represents the ongoing tension between authority, traditional authority, and influence, and the sort of alleged cult-like followings that can be amassed on the internet. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the complete story of Jay Dyer. Now, Jay Dyer is still online. He's still making content. So this story is evolving. Maybe 5 years down the line or 10 years down the line, I will go ahead and revisit his story. And you might have noticed that this video is a lot longer and a bit different than the typical content that I make on this channel. So I figured I'd try something new. Let me know if you like it or not in the comments. And if a lot of people like it, I'll do more of these. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.